Good evening. If the wolves are howling and the moon is full, then it must be time for having a drink with Mink. I am your host, Jason Mink. Halloween is just around the corner, so let's get things started with an all-out spooktacular. This one is not for the faint of heart, so if over-the-top imagery and horror sets you off, check in again next week. Before we begin, make sure you have a nice beverage on hand. You're gonna need it. Viewers of a certain age, or savvy horror fans in general, may remember the Remco monsters. Big 9-inch offerings in the Mego style, these figures not only glowed in the dark, they had the secret power to crush other toys in their arms with the press of a button. Offered were the usual suspects, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, as well as the Mummy, the Phantom of the Opera, and the Creature of the Black Lagoon. As great as these were, by 1980, action figure culture had changed. Large toys with cloth outfits were passé. The new scale was 3 3/4 inches, and all the kids knew it. I reckon Remco did too, as Drac and his pals were joined by the Remco mini monsters. All 6 of the aforementioned characters were offered in the smaller line, although today we're only looking at the big 3. King of the Vampires, Dracula has a wonderful face sculpt, channeling Lugosi without going too realistic. His corpse green skin is accented nicely by the bright red blood at the corners of his mouth. He sports his trademark evening wear and one of those irritating plastic capes that always ripped under the armpits. Speaking of arms, Dracs are sculpted in an oddly beseeching pose. Maybe he's meant to scoop up a never-produced victim, or maybe he just wants $1 for a cup of coffee. Sorry, buddy, I gave all my change to Mr. Hyde. If Dracula is making the scene, can his shambling, flat-headed friend be far behind? Frankenstein here actually has an impressive Karloff likeness. Remember, his head is about as big as a peanut M&M, so that's no small feat. Frank makes the best use of his limited articulation, sculpted in his iconic arms-out pose. Not sure why his arms are at the sides here. Maybe he pitted out that old coat of his. Speaking of, why does he look like he dressed out of a Men's Warehouse dumpster? You think if you were going to go to the trouble of reanimating a corpse, the least you could do is get it a powder blue jumpsuit and some fresh keds to wear. Next up, the Wolfman. Another solid likeness, this time of Lon Chaney Jr. in his best-known role. Hey, I love Spider Baby as much as the next guy, but let's face facts. Larry Talbot is more iconic. Like the others, the Wolfman moves at the hips, shoulders, and neck. That's nowhere near today's hyper-articulated playthings, but you'll be too busy running for your life to notice. Wolfie is rocking his iconic shirt tucked into pants look. Remember, just because you're a lycanthrope doesn't mean you need to be a slob. Instead of just roaming the midnight streets, Remco saw to it that the monsters had somewhere to hang out. The monster play case is just that, a hybrid carry case and environment for your fearsome friends. Made of colorful laminated cardboard and vacuum plastic, this lightweight addition to the line was the ideal environment for all your spooky adventures. There's an opening castle door, dedicated spaces for the monsters to hide, plus an operating table for routine maintenance. Wake up! It's time for a drink with Mink! While it may seem chintzy by today's standards, it is. But there's also an undeniable charm to it. The plastic laminate isn't going to win any prizes in the aesthetics department, but it does a fine job providing a sturdy and cleanable play surface, as well as reinforcement for the cardboard. The colorful printed artwork straddles the line between creepy and corny, with some cute little details tucked in for the observant. The colors are well chosen, allowing the darker-hued monsters to pop in the otherwise gloomy environment. Speaking of, this scale was ideal for use with other popular figure lines like Star Wars, Micronauts, and Pocket Heroes, so Luke Skywalker, a Kroyer, and Aquaman could battle the monsters in their very lair. Perhaps the coolest thing about this particular play case is that the guy who brought it in didn't even realize the monsters were inside. How wild is it that these emissaries of evil have been slumbering for decades, just waiting until some unwitting fool once again opened their nighted crypt? I was 10 years old and too old for toys when these came out, so it was a blast to finally experience these vintage beauties. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And now, a name that will strike fear into the short box of any self-respecting OG, Myron Fass. This maverick publisher made his fortune on a series of fly-by-night publications that ignored both good taste and industry rules. Made up of previously published pre-code horror reprints Fass most certainly didn't have the rights to, these smudgy, back-row magazines sold on the strength of their garish covers, which featured scenes nowhere to be found in the stories within. Like this. But as the kids say, that's not a bug, it's a feature. Let's start with Tales from the Tomb. While this image is crude and ill-proportioned, it also has an undeniable power that makes it hard to look away from. But look away we must to glory in this charnel house of a contents page. Presenting the story titles in this inventive fashion adds an extra allure to something otherwise expected and commonplace. Getting art in what is essentially the margins is a huge value add, and there's still a whole magazine to read. Dead Witch is a gothic potboiler featuring the dysfunctional family dynamic of sisters Mary, Pearl, Ruby, and Elvira. When handsome lawyer John arrives to help the girls settle in to their newly inherited home, Mary, Pearl, and Ruby begin plotting to ensnare him with their feminine wiles. I'm not sure where on the body the wiles are, but you can bet it's not pretty. Upset at her sister's scheming ways, Elvira runs off, stumbling across a secret room full of witch stuff. All I ever found moving into a new place were some marbles and a bottle of Fleischmann's lemon-flavored gin. At any rate, Elvira gives her sisters one more chance to back off Tom, but these three are committed, and there's nothing for it but sorcery. First, Elvie turns up the heat, casting a spell that sees Pearl age so rapidly she bursts into flames. Talk about your hot flashes. John discovers her still smoking corpse, but, unable to come to grips with the horror, decides the near-total incineration was self-inflicted. Right. As there's no phone to call for help, the others just have to wait until morning, but the mayhem has just begun. Ruby is the next victim, beset by a cloud of bloodthirsty bats. This hungry little fella even steals an eyeball. That's like the edge piece on the birthday cake of death. Mary expresses her fears to John, who heads up the highway to flag down some help. Elvira prepares her last fatal spell, but before she can carry through, John returns. The wannabe witch improvises and, in a perfect example of why you should never go off script, inadvertently destroys herself. John and Mary take off, leaving a lot of unanswered questions for whoever drops by next. Anna Mord had a strange habit of eating raw meat. All would have gone well for Carl Moreno if he hadn't become greedy. The aforementioned Carl is a mortician, and a handsome one to boot. His plan is to marry rich old raw meat-eating Anna for her money, and he's been feeding her bits of his clients to stay in her graces. Why bother with a good 401k when you can just get hitched to someone who likes to eat fingers? Unfortunately for everyone involved, Carl has a little something-something on the side, and he and his mistress, Linda, plan on rubbing the old bat out for good. Conniving Carl feeds Anna a poisoned heart, which quickly has its desired effect. The old woman dies, and, as she's left everything to her murderer in her will, it looks like it's peaches and cake for Carl and Linda. Or is it? Anna revives while Carl is in the process of embalming her, and Carl gives her a whack in the chops with a hammer to settle her down, then nails up the coffin and calls it good. Carl and his gal get hitched, and it's happily ever after. At least, until a noise in the night sees Carl stab what he thinks is an intruder, but is instead his new bride. Of course, it's the work of Anna, who isn't going to let something like being murdered twice keep her from enjoying her favorite snack. And they say MSG is addictive. In a break from the pre-code reprints that usually populated the pages of Eerie Pubs, we get this new tale about the hot new drug that's been taking 1970 by storm. It's called LSD, and Larry makes the case convincingly enough that Joe and his haircut agree to give it a try. He hopes that he won't be sorry, as that stuff can give you a head full of bad ideas. That night, Joe makes the scene, and the party has already begun. He quaffs the proffered sugar cube, and off he goes. There are lights, explosions, and a lot of Pink Floyd. But things take a decidedly dark turn when blood begins gushing from every opening in this formerly inanimate table skull. Flesh and hair begin forming on the glistening headbone. Before long, the skull assumes a bloodied feminine countenance, abruptly popping when Joe shrieks in terror. And who could blame him? You go into something like this expecting trails and crystal blue persuasion, and you end up in a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. The sound of gunshots plunge Joe from one horrified state to another as the bloodied corpse does the cool jerk before his eyes. Gunpowder burns in his nostrils as the shocking scene unfolds before him. Then, ice-cold metal tingles against the flesh of his right hand, which has both been chopped off at the wrist and, inexplicably, nailed to the wall. Joe spins dizzily, falling to the floor with the stench of death in the air. Then, a final thick veil of blackness rolls in, but the viewer gets to see what Joe missed. A scene of carnage Officer O'Malley can only describe as something from a human butcher shop. Someone tell Anna Ward her dinner is ready. In The Blackness of Evil, we meet master clockmaker Frederick Kaffner, a slave driver by any other name. His assistant Carl wishes he had the courage to kill his oppressor, but he's pretty spineless, at least until a representative of the dark forces shows up on Walpurgis night and encourages Carl to indulge in his destructive instincts. Never good with peer pressure, Carl gives in, plunging a convenient dagger into Kaffner's heart. However, with his last breath, the dying craftsman curses Carl. As the clocks in the shop stop ticking, so shall all clocks, making it Walpurgis night forever, with Carl's death the only way of breaking the curse. This is great news for the demonic horde, as to reign forever is their wish. They go forth into the night, indulging in what the writer describes as an orgy of darkness. It's like a key party of doom, but with lower wattage light bulbs. And while the demons have a great time working over the townsfolk, the rain just won't let up. Soon the streets are flooding, and as the residents won't let them in, the evil horde is forced to flee into the hills. Faced with their own imminent demise, they turn on Carl, killing him and thus ending the curse. The clocks begin to tick again, and Walpurgis night finally ends. At least, until next year. Next up, Terror Tales number 10 from November of 1969. As you can see from the contents page, it was a good year for terror. And not even the bravest of men can face the horror of the mine. In the offices of the Blue Valley Coal Company, a plan is set to reopen the old mine. Engineer for the project Todd excitedly fills girlfriend Prudence in on the deets. As she's also the daughter of the mining company owner, she decides it's Jake to tag along on the big day, in spite of being a girl and all. Things are alright at first, but go tits up when they encounter this poor fellow. He's blood all over, and something back in the mine is responsible. Now, I'm not a gambling man, but I'd bet you a Hamilton. It's the Boogans. Before the miner could say more, he expires. Instead of aching May with the amscray, these chuckleheads decide to stick around and investigate. And surprise, it's a bloodthirsty monster. Who could have seen that coming? The tentacled terror squirms out of the darkness, pursuing the trio through the rough-hewn mines. Sadly, Dad can't keep step with the sprier young folks and gets himself tentacled. Prudence falters, stunned by Pop's grisly death, becoming ensnared herself. Todd takes a pickaxe and cuts Prue loose. It's all right, baby. I'll have you free in a minute. Boy, men were built different back then. True to his word, Todd liberates his girlfriend, and the two manage to escape back to the surface. Soon enough, all hell is breaking loose, what with squirming appendages exploding out of every subterranean opening. Todd rushes to the hospital, where Prue is convalescing, intent on getting her to safety. He steals a car, and the two flee the town. Turns out the president himself has authorized the use of the bomb. What type of bomb isn't specifically specified, but these pilots know it's the real McCoy. And boom goes the dynamite, leaving the town a smoking radioactive crater. Prudence breaks down over the loss of her father, but Todd is more practical. Go ahead and cry it out, baby. But remember, we've still got a future. I'm starting to think that she would have been better off with the tentacle monster. The aptly named Night of Terror begins with this grisly scene. Not quite sure about the physics of the scenario, but it certainly catches the reader's attention. As the story begins, Sue and John Trent are having a violent quarrel. "Mother, this is Sue. I've had a quarrel with John. I hate him, and I'm coming for a visit with you." Charming. Anyway, John is so happy to be rid of her, he offers to chauffeur. However, while Sue is busy packing, he calls a pal and sets up a scenario to teach his wife a little lesson. Later that night, John pretends the car is broken down, leaving them stranded outside a creepy old mansion with a reputation for being haunted. However, what is meant to be a prank becomes deadly serious when John discovers his helpful friend dead on the floor. The couple decide to exit stage left, but just then, this axe-wielding hag appears, and she's feeling choppy. Sue takes a tumble, while John's fate is described in the dialogue. "Oh, my head. The blood. Yeah!" Pleased with her handiwork, the axe-crone pauses, only to find that the cops have arrived. They manage to subdue her, and we learn she's a patient from the local mental hospital. Years ago, she killed her husband here, and now, every time she escapes, she returns and chops up whoever she can find. Come along now, back to the asylum. You get the sense this happens all the time. If you guys can't keep her from escaping, at least keep the damn axes locked up. The Undying Fiend is a 6-page shocker featuring this bloodthirsty fellow. Now, either he's really big, or she's dang tiny. Only one way to find out. Somewhere on the desolate coast of England, the remains of a Viking ship are uncovered. It contains an ancient stone tablet inscribed with runic symbols, and they give Marcia the shivers. Turns out the ship's captain, the brave Viking warrior Garth, was also a vampire, and when he fell, his fellow tribesmen couldn't bring themselves to put a stake through his heart, laying him to rest on the ship. The next day, the team uncovers old Garth himself, and while he appears long dead, this mesmerizing panel says otherwise. Garth's body is taken back to the scientist's campsite just in time to be revived by the full moon. And he really chomps this guy. Didn't even wait for his salad. And dig all the vital fluid streaming from his mouth and hands. Someone get Garth a wet nap. His silhouette on the outside of the tent alerts the others to the blood-sucking activities, but by the time they arrive, it's too late. Expedition head Dr. Mowbray is skeptical of the idea that Garth walks, instead thinking that the body has been stolen by his assistant, Lloyd. He's also apparently homicidal, seeking out and then killing Lloyd with an ice pick so that Garth will be blamed. Now unhinged, Mowbray goes after Marcia, convinced the others are working against him. Only Marcia has a gun, and she's low-key fine with using it. Gut shot, Mowbray collapses to the floor, and Marcia's about to cut out when a blood-curdling laugh fills the air. Garth has killed everyone else, but has special plans for her. Garth bites her, and then the vampire's deadly poison enters her bloodstream. Now compliant, Marcia rises and gets to work. She douses the corpses of her former expedition in gasoline and burns them along with the remains of the dragon ship. After apparently hitting Sears and Roebuck to get Garth a suit, they find a nice little cottage next to the, graveyard and settle in for a life of domestic bliss. Garth needs to work on his spittle problem, though. Vampiric slave wife or not, no one wants to see that. This cover always tripped me out, as I thought the robot guy was holding the gun to his own head. I believe this image was a reused cover from Perry Rodan, a European sci-fi magazine popular a few years previous. Whatever it is, it's unsettling. Nightmare Island concerns shapely ladies and bloodthirsty rodents, favorites of any healthy red-blooded American monster kid. A plane crash sees Tom and Lucy Ball stranded on a mysterious rock island. They seek out the crazy old man who lives there, and he puts them up for the night as long as they don't leave the house. Lucy, however, is a lousy guest and disregards her host's urgings, discovering a dog-sized rat on a chain in the process. She faints, but before she ends up as rat chow, the men seek her out, dragging her back into the house. And it looks like the stories about Doc being crazy were wrong. Turns out he's mad. He shows them another one of his experiments, a fun-sized horse, but Lucy is still stuck on the whole rat thing, and with good reason. Later, a blood-curdling shriek pierces the night, and the couple discover their host outside, torn to pieces. Worse still, the rat has escaped. The couple barricade themselves inside the house, but this is a stopgap at best. Then inspiration strikes, leading Tom and Lucy to build a giant rat trap. They bait the trap with rotten meat and wait. If they can just survive until morning, they can escape on the supply ship, but the night is long and crimson-eyed. When Tom sends Lucy to check the basement windows, the waiting rat strikes. Tom takes it personal, which is baffling. "You're the one who sent her into the basement, dude." Looking an awful lot like a certain corporate mascot, the rat bares its fangs, then leaps. Driving Tom back, the trap springs on its combatants, just as the whole place goes up in flames. Sad. If only he carried some pocket cheese, all of this could have been avoided. I never leave the house without it. What's that? You find the concept of pocket cheese disgusting? Fine. I won't offer you any. Well, okay, just a little piece. Fatal Scalpel is a nasty bit of business, sidestepping supernatural tropes in favor of human evil. Plastic surgeon Alex Harding is tops in his field. However, he harbors a secret fear, one confirmed by a visit to the office of private detective Bernie Rogers. Turns out Harding's wife Catherine is cheating on him with a Latin American. This crushes the plastic surgeon until Rogers informs him that her lover has left town that morning. Harding heads home, hoping to just put the whole thing behind him, but it's never that simple. Turns out Rogers is Catherine's lover, and he clues her in via telephone. When Harding arrives home, she continues to string him along, all the while hoping for his demise. Rogers, meanwhile, has a congratulatory drinky poo and then climbs behind the wheel with unsurprising results. Slamming into an oncoming truck, he gets a face full of windshield for his trouble. And because fate is a fickle mistress, he ends up on Harding's operating table. The anesthesia makes him chatty, and Rogers reveals that he is in fact Catherine's mystery lover. Wait, you're not Latin American? Something in Harding snaps then, and a twisted grin on his face, he performs the surgery. Afterwards, the doctor is seen taking his tools with him. Turns out there's more work to do at home. Confronting the infidelious Catherine as she prepares for her lover at the makeup table, Harding gives his delicate little flower stem a twist before knocking her out with ether. Strapping her to a crude operating table in the kitchen, the doctor gets to work. A half an hour later, and the deed is done. His work complete, Harding then catches the bullet train to Temple University, if you get my drift. When the cops show up, they deliver the grim coda. Harding has left all of his money to Catherine, with the caveat she marry Rogers. Turns out the two were made for each other, after all. And there you have it. In spite of their exploitative covers and dubious publishing history, these hastily assembled magazines possess an allure that has yet to be replicated. Oh sure, there's been a lot of sleazy, violent crap published in the last 50 years, but it's not a patch on the stained and tattered fabric of Myron Fass's Eerie Pubs. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for more great Halloween-based content in the next few weeks. The fun is just getting started. I am Jason Mink, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.